This is One on One. I'm going to introduce you to somebody I really had been looking forward to talking to for a long time. She is Laurie Fabiano. She has written a wonderful book called Elizabeth Street, a novel based on true events. Your first novel.
Yes, my
You have a
first novel.
fascinating background. You served as a deputy mayor of Hoboken. You have a background in nonprofit work. You're really smart, and you wrote this amazing book, Elizabeth Street, based in that's in New York City, right?
Yes.
And give people a sense of this, because you went about to write this story about your grandmother and your great-grandmother who came from Sicily.
Actually, Calabria.
Oh, excuse me, Calabria. And it has to do with the Black Hand, and for those of you who don't know what the Black Hand, that's the precursor, if you will, to the Mafia, and it has to do with so many other things. But it's a family story.
Right. It's a family
What
story.
is it, and why did you do it?
So when I was 16 years old, I was watching an old black and white movie with my grandmother, and she wasn't paying attention. She was knitting a peace sign for my jeans, which dates me, obviously. And all of a sudden, she caught wind of what was
looking at a picture of you,
happening on the screen. Yes, that's me and Nanny.
Yeah.
And she dropped the knitting needles, gasped, and went running upstairs. And this was very uncharacteristic for my grandmother. She was very stalwart.
Was it a mob picture?
It was. It was called Pay or Die with Ernest Borgnine, and it was about Giuseppe Petrosino, or based on the life of Giuseppe Petrosino. So I went running upstairs, and I'm like, Nanny, what's the matter? And she said, I told you not to watch that Mafia stuff. I knew she hated anything Mafia related. And I said, Mom, it's not the, Nanny, it's not the Mafia, it's the Black Hand, they said. And she said, you know nothing. And she said, and I was like, why are you so upset? And she said, they killed him. I said, what are you talking about? A policeman in the film, they killed him. I said, did you watch the film? How do you know? And she said, no, it's my life too. And at that point, she just said, I was kidnapped and he helped our family, and I'm not going to talk about it. And so, of course, at 16 years old, this is all I wanted to talk about. This was an incredible revelation. But my grandmother was absolutely not going to talk about it. So I tried talking to her brothers. I tried talking to other older relatives, got the same stonewalling. It took 15 years of me trying to talk to her, trying to talk to relatives, and finally in her 80s, in fact, that photo that you saw was the day that I sat down and taped her for 12 hours talking about her life. And when we got to the part on the kidnapping, she said, turn that off, I won't talk. If that's on, I won't talk. And to this day, I feel badly that I lied to her and said it was off. But obviously, I'm glad that I got the story. Her memory was impeccable. She remembered every detail of the kidnapping.
She was kidnapped?
She was kidnapped.
By the Black Hand?
By the Black Hand. And she was one of the only...
For those, the Black Hand was the precursor to the mob.
Yes and no. The truth is the Black Hand was, the name the Black Hand was invented by the newspapers to sell more newspapers with creating Black Hand crime in the Lower East Side. And it was a moniker that tons and tons of gangs just took on. In truth, there was only one gang, the Lupo Morello gang, that could be said to be the precursor to the Mafia, but hundreds, literally hundreds of these unaffiliated gangs used the name Black Hand because it struck terror.
And they were not, quote, organized.
They were not organized.
It was not organized crime.
No, it was not organized crime at all.
But they would extort. They would tell merchants that if you did not pay protection money, that bad things would happen, and bad things happened.
Absolutely. There was tons of bombings in the Lower East Side around Elizabeth Street. In fact, around Elizabeth Street within a 3-year period, there were 42 bombings. I mean, could you imagine, how we would react to that today? That was terrorism at its peak.
Here's the irony, sorry for interrupting. And there's so many, by the way, go out and get the book, because we're only touching on it for the PBS television version. One of the reasons you wrote this book is because you said that we in the media often romanticize the Mafia. We are talking about Italians brutalizing, terrorizing other Italians.
That's right.
In their own neighborhoods. Honest, hardworking people.
Yep.
Big part of the story, no?
It's a huge part of the story, and I'm so glad you touched on that, because we have so romanticized the Mafia. you know, The Godfather just started it, and there's virtually no, you know, of course there was a mafia. Was it as romantic as they've made it seem? Not even close. These were thugs. These were ignorant thugs. And the reason there were so many of them was Italy at the time had incredibly strong laws for parolees. So when you got out of jail, you had to check in every day at the police station. You couldn't go into a bar. You couldn't carry a weapon. So
who
they came
to
here.
the United States?
All, you know, every single parolee came to the United States, and they would, of course, be smuggled in on the ships, and to pay for their passage, they would do a job and move on to another city. So they would do these bombings, they would do these, you know, kidnappings, and they were ruthless because they were in flux, and the police really had no power, because the other thing is Italians absolutely didn't trust authority. They trusted each other. They trusted their own tribes, which tended to be their villages.
There's so many things going on in my head because, and we're going to really not do justice to this, but one of the things in the book that strikes me is, and again, it's a novel based on true events, and I was trying to figure out who was who, but your grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of the book, particularly early on, where there's a lot of tragedy in the early 1900s.
Yes.
Where one of the relatives comes here.
Right.
And there's a terrible accident. And it changes the course of the family dramatically.
Absolutely. So my great-grandmother's first husband, Nunzio, who she was madly in love with, came here first, like most men did in those days, to earn money and bring her over. He was killed building the Brooklyn Union gas tanks. He was crushed under 200 tons of steel, one of 5 men who was killed that day. It took me years to find that article, and the day that I finally found it in the New York Public Library and I cranked it up and saw his name was just, it was devastating. You know, in 1890, 90% of the public works workers were Italian, and that coincided with the great building of New York City. So most of the tunnels, the bridges, the infrastructure were built by Italians, but they were kind of treated like chattel or donkeys.
That's right.
And
by the way, he was educated. He was trained, and I think he was an architect or an engineer?
He was an engineer, which was very, very rare, but you know, he was starving to death. What was going on in Italy?
He did what he was told to earn money and send it back to Italy.
Correct. And then the story goes that my grandmother knew the moment he died, even though she was in Italy, and stopped speaking.
For a long time.
She was a town midwife, and she did not speak at all. And the people in town took up a collection to send her to America in hopes that if she saw his grave, she would begin to live again.
Can I ask you to do this? Could you tell folks why they should go out and get the book, whether they are Italian or not?
Because there's a lot of history here, and I think our history as a people is really just a collection of family stories. And unless we start telling these family stories, we're losing a big part of our history. And what's been incredibly gratifying about this is so many Italian Americans, and not just Italian Americans, Irish Americans as well, have said, this has inspired me to go back, to look, and to tell my stories, as I hope you do too.
You've done something meaningful, and it's a wonderful book. I've enjoyed it, and I know others will too. It's called Elizabeth Street, a novel based on true events. Laurie Fabiano, I want to thank our good friends Ray and Sue Bermucci for introducing us to this book, and to you. I wish you all the best.
Great, thank you very much.
You've done an important service.
Thank you.
We'll be right back right after this.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation, celebrating 25 years of broadcast excellence. Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, New Jersey Manufacturers Insurance Group, auto insurance, homeowners insurance, and banking under the principle of stewardship. PSE&G, committed to improving New Jersey's economy and strengthening its communities. And by the law firm of Gibbons, P.C. Promotional support provided by NJ Biz, All Business, All New Jersey, and by the New Jersey Business and Industry Association and its monthly magazine, New Jersey Business. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area. One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been produced in partnership with St. Joseph's Healthcare System.